have changed because nobody knew what to say. Tonight, we're having an honest conversation about communication, accountability, leadership, family patterns, and the emotional skills many of us were never taught. We'll ask questions like: who taught you how to apologize? Who taught you how to handle rejection? What conversations have you been avoiding? Do people feel safe talking to you? Are you listening to understand or just to respond? This is not about blame. It's about becoming better partners, parents, leaders, friends, and human beings. Join me tonight. This is Mental Warrior 22.
I keep it nappy and I do what make me happy and
Hey everyone, what's going on? Hey Danielle, thanks for joining. Everyone, welcome. I am Alex Bonilla. Tonight, we're talking about something that affects every single person listening. This may affect your marriage, your friendship, your relationship with your children, your leadership, your career, your mental health. Most importantly, this affects your relationship with yourself. Tonight's topic is simple. Nobody ever taught us emotional intelligence. Now, I want to make sure that we understand this is not going to be therapy. To some, it might feel that way. Good. Some of us need a little therapy, a little food for the soul, right? This isn't me pretending that I've got all the answers because I don't, right? This is a conversation that we're having, real conversations about something that is going to impact all of us, whether we realize it or not. Because I've discovered this over the years as a veteran, as a leader, as a father, as someone who's battled PTSD, right? As someone who's spent years trying to understand why people do what they do. Most people aren't struggling because they're bad people. Most people are struggling because nobody ever taught them the emotional skills needed to navigate through life. So I want you to think about that. Most of us spent 12 years in school, at least. Some of us went to college. Some of us spent years in the military. Some built careers, raised families, started businesses, lead teams, managed organizations. But nobody ever sat us down and taught us how to process the disappointment. Nobody taught us how to communicate the hurt, how to handle the rejection. Nobody taught us how to apologize. Um, Nobody taught us how to have the difficult conversations and how to regulate emotions when life falls apart. Because of that, there's a lot of adults walking around carrying these emotional wounds and they don't understand while unintentionally creating wounds in other people. This isn't because they're evil and it's not because they're malicious. It's because they're operating from the emotional tools they were never received, right? They never got. So tonight, I want to challenge you to just think a little differently, not about anybody else, but about yourself. Because emotional intelligence, it starts with self awareness. It's the self awareness can be uncomfortable because self awareness is going to force you to ask questions that we normally avoid. Once again, thank you for joining. I'm looking over here at the comments. Trina, welcome. Danielle, once again, welcome. Lori, thanks for being here. Meg, hey. This is going to get pretty interesting for some. It might hit hard, it might hit close to home, and that's good. I want you to sit with that for a minute. You know, we need to have these difficult conversations because a lot of the questions we avoid are questions like, why do I react that way? Why does criticism bother me so much? Why do I shut down during conflict, get defensive? Why do I struggle trusting people? Why do I keep repeating the same patterns? Those things aren't easy. but they're necessary because growth is going to begin where the awareness starts. So here are some questions I've written down that I always feel that it's very difficult to answer at times, right? And I want you to genuinely think about this. Who taught you, who taught you how to apologize? Who taught you how to apologize? I can honestly say that with all the life lessons, and my mom did the best she could raising us, I don't think anyone has ever taught me how to apologize. I think this is something that, I don't want to say is common sense or a matter of respect, but it's something that I was fortunate enough to kind of develop along the way, right? Have that empathy towards people. But who taught you how to apologize? Now, not who taught you to say sorry, because a lot of us are pretty good at that, right? A lot of us internalize and we have that trauma that we apologize for everything. We're not talking about that. But who actually taught you how to apologize? Who taught you how to sit down with someone you've hurt and take responsibility without making excuses? Who taught you how to acknowledge someone else's pain without immediately defending yourself? Who taught you how to repair the trust after you've already broken it? Right? Most of us can't answer that. But here's another one. Who taught you how to handle rejection? And I want you to think about that. Who genuinely taught you how to handle rejection? Who taught you what to do when someone says no, or when a relationship ends, when the promotion goes to someone else, when life doesn't go the way that it's planned, right? Because let's be real. It's the one thing that we can guarantee is that life is going to guarantee rejections. Every single one of us is going to experience it. Relationships will end, people will leave, dreams might fail, plans fall apart, doors will close. The question isn't whether rejection will happen. The question is, what will you do when it does? And most people were never taught. So instead of processing the rejection, they personalize it, right? This goes back to some of the other conversations. When we process it and we internalize, our brain's just going to naturally think negative, right? I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm unlovable. I'll never succeed. And eventually those stories are going to become what? It's going to become beliefs. You tell it to yourself enough times, that becomes your reality. Those beliefs are going to become identities. So the third question in that is, who taught you, or has anyone ever taught you how to disagree without ruining the relationship? Like, seriously, who taught you that? Because in today's day and age, right? Today, it feels like disagreement will automatically create division. Doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether it's religion, politics, a relationship. Like, everything feels now like if you disagree, it creates a division, right? If someone thinks differently, you're automatically the enemy. If someone challenges you, you become defensive. If it teaches us that disagreements, like, rejection is still a struggle. I'm sure. I am sure. Listen, I don't care who you are. Rejection will always sting a little bit, but it stings more the bigger the ego. And a lot of us think we don't. But the ego doesn't mean that you have to be, in the traditional sense, what most of us think, the arrogant, the cocky. No, we all have an ego of some sort. And it hurts more because sometimes we're like, there's no way in hell you're going to reject me. Like, I'm a big deal. I'm great. I'm an awesome person. I'm this. A lot of times that rejection has nothing to do with you and everything to do with whatever they got going on, right? So I want you to think about that. But emotional intelligence teaches us something different, right? It teaches us that the disagreement doesn't have to become disrespect. You can still disagree with someone and still value them, right? You remember back in the days when we could actually agree to disagree? You can set boundaries and still love people. Those things are not opposite. They're just signs of maturity. So, Meg, I learned it first by watching my elders, then as I got older through my experiences. Absolutely. Absolutely. These are things that in everything in life, right? If you're in the military in a leadership position, right, you see those who did it before you, who led you, and you take the good out of those things and you learn from their lack of or whatever you don't agree with. So let's talk about survival mode. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my own life is this: survival mode is not the same thing as healing. I think a lot of people listening tonight needed to hear that. Maybe you already know that, but some of you have become incredibly good at surviving. You go to work, you pay the bills, you're taking care of the family, handling your responsibilities. You're showing up every day, right? You're pushing through. You keep moving. You keep moving. You keep grinding. And from the outside, everyone is thinking that you're fine. But on the inside, you're exhausted, disconnected, you're overwhelmed. Some of you maybe feel numb, right? Because surviving and healing, again, not the same thing. Just because you're functioning doesn't mean you've healed. Just because you're productive doesn't mean you're healthy. Just because you're carrying the weight doesn't mean you're okay. And a lot of us, especially for veterans, for instance, we're conditioned to survive. That's what we do. No one talks to us about healing. We're conditioned to survive, right? It's mission first, it's drive on, it's suck it up. You keep moving. And on the battlefield, there's value in that. The mindset can save lives. It creates that resilience, it creates that grit and that toughness. But if you're not careful, especially when you come home, it also creates that emotional isolation. And eventually we become so good at carrying things that we forget how to put them down. We become good at surviving that you don't learn how to heal anymore. And emotional intelligence requires healing, not perfection, healing. So, Lori, pride gets in the way a lot that I have witnessed and have had to learn to let go. I think that that is a big thing. It's all about killing the ego. Killing the ego and that pride is just until you can kill the ego, it's always going to get in the way. It's always going to have that wall in front of you. It's always going to fill your mind with these lies that we discussed last week, the lies. So let's discuss what emotional intelligence really is. Let's define it. And I'm going to define it in the most simplest form, right? Because emotional intelligence is not weakness, it's not being soft, it's not being passive, or it's not avoiding the conflicts or pretending that everything is okay. No. Emotional intelligence is understanding what you are feeling, understanding why you're feeling it, and choosing your response instead of reacting. That's it. It's that simple. It's understanding your feelings, understanding the why. And regardless of that, it's choosing your response because everything comes to a choice, choosing that response instead of simply reacting. It's it's being able to talk to someone and say, you know what, please, I want to know your perspective. Tell me why you did what you did. Before I say anything, I may not agree with you, but at least help me understand why you may have done those things. So, Deborah, the VA now has a shot that goes into your neck called the Stella Gavelin block. It works on flight or fight mode. Everyone that I know that is a veteran that has taken it has really helped them. But as always, talk to your doctor first. I like that. I'm going to look into that. I've never heard of that. So, Linda, use this tool every day. Choose the response. Absolutely. Danielle, I take a beat count to 10 before speaking. I used to do that. I would count to 5 because when I was recovering from my wounds, when I was going through everything, when my PTSD was at its peak, I was very reactive. I interpreted everything as an insult. Doesn't matter. I was that guy where you're like, hey, Alex, good morning. I would find something wrong with that, right? Like, what's so good about this morning? Or don't tell me to have a good day. Don't tell me what to do. Like it was that bad. And after a while, I had to do that. I had to kind of do that little count in my head just so I could let it marinate for a moment to truly understand what they were saying. So, yes, take a knee before responding. Absolutely. But emotional intelligence, very simple, right? But it is a hard skill because reacting is very easy. Anyone can react. Anyone can lose their temper. Anyone can shut down, walk away. Anyone can say something they'll regret. And you see that happen all the time. Emotional intelligence happens in that pause. It's the moment between the feeling and the response. The moment where you can stop and ask, what am I feeling right now? What am I actually feeling? And most people might say anger, but anger is often the secondary. Underneath the anger, there's always something else. There's that fear, the hurt, maybe an embarrassment, disappointment, rejection, insecurity. And until we learn to identify those emotions, they're going to continue controlling us without our awareness. Meg, I tell my son all the time, take a deep breath before responding. It's all in the verbiage, right? Like in the moment when it's happening, you can't tell someone, hey, relax. Right? We all know you can't say that. It's all in how you choose to respond and not letting someone else's emotions also control you. So let's talk about now where all of this shows up the most, right? Relationships. Because if you want to see someone's emotional intelligence level, don't look at them when life is easy. Don't. You want to see someone's emotional level, look at them when they're hurting. Look at them when they're disappointed. Look at them when they're angry, when they're being challenged, right? When you challenge someone, that's when you'll see their level of emotional intelligence, right? That's when you'll see how they choose to show up, how they will react. And that's where the emotional intelligence is going to reveal itself. It's like the most relationship problems aren't actually relationship problems, right? Now, I'm not talking about the other stuff. I'm not talking about the lying, the cheating. No, different things, right? Most of the relationship problems aren't actually relationship problems. They're emotional intelligence problems. And I want you to think about that. People say we just don't communicate. We've grown apart. We argue all the time. You don't understand me. You don't listen. But again, underneath those statements, it's something deeper. Like we just mentioned a moment ago, it is the fear, the insecurity, your unmet needs, the assumptions, prior wounds, unresolved trauma. Most people aren't arguing about what they're actually arguing about. They're arguing about what they're feeling. It could be anything. I've gotten into the most simplest arguments, and at the time you don't realize that it's something deeper. You can tell me about the remote control and I say it's not there, and you're like, yeah, it is here. And then we start arguing. You're such a liar. You're always lying and all that. That has nothing to do with the remote. At that point, you just took that moment to just lash out on whatever it is that's hurting. That's not communication. So let's talk about the argument under the argument, right? For example, a husband forgets something important. Let's say the husband forgot something important, the wife got upset. The argument begins. On the surface, it's going to look like they're arguing about he forgot something, but they're not. The real argument sounds more like you don't value me, you don't see me, you don't prioritize me. So what happens? The husband becomes defensive, not because of what the wife said, but because of what he's hearing, right? There's what she said, there's what he's hearing. And what he's hearing is you're failing, you're not enough. So now they're no longer talking about the actual issue. They're talking through the pain. They're talking through the insecurity, through the fear, through the and neither one of the two realizes it. And that's why emotional intelligence matters, because emotional intelligent people are going to learn to identify what's happening underneath that conversation, right? An emotional intelligent person is going to take a deep breath and step back and be like, wait, what's really going on? Let's talk about this, right? You stop reacting to the words and start listening for the emotion. And again, this leads to why people shut down. Why people shut down. Theo, it's the husband's fault for getting. No, it's not, Theo. It is not. Missy, sometimes it's hard to separate the emotions. It's several at once. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it happens in time. It takes practice. It doesn't happen overnight. Everything is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So it's checking your emotions at the door. It's like when you hear, if any of you worked in an environment where you're serving other people, you're taking on people's problems, whether it's in, law enforcement, first responder, a teacher, a counselor, something. When you come home, you always hear, don't bring that home, right? You check that at the door. So it's the same. Check your emotions at the door when you start having certain conversations with your partner, with your person. A lot of people listening tonight either know someone who shut down or you're that person. Conflicts are going to happen. The conversation will get uncomfortable. And when it does, they or yourself will disappear emotionally. There'll be silence. The answers will get shorter. There'll be withdrawals, distance, and walls. Now, there's plenty of reasons why, right? Without putting the blame on someone else right now, right? Because they have a large part to do with it, right? We're not talking about being in that abusive relationship where the other person is just constantly taking advantage of you being quiet, so they're pounding with the abuse. No, that's something different. People often assume that the person who shut down doesn't care, but that's not always true. Sometimes you're just overwhelmed, and nobody taught us how to process conflict. Nobody taught them to stay present during those difficult conversations, right? Nobody taught you how to communicate through the discomfort. So instead, what are we doing? We retreat, right? You shut down. And it's not because you don't care, but because you don't know what else to do. So understand this. Understanding that doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. And understanding the difference between the explanation and the excuse is in itself emotional intelligence. So, Lori, I have tendencies to shut down and check out when I feel like I'm getting emotional or what's happening gets overwhelming. And that's a conversation, even within yourself. Sit with it for a moment. I would tell you, sit with it. Journal. Write down your emotions so you understand why you're feeling the way that you might be feeling. Even if you don't feel comfortable yet saying it to someone else. But the more you do that, the more you shut down. Now you're not shutting down from just one person or that conversation. You're shutting yourself out. And that's going to carry over to other relationships and other parts of your life. So, where else does this show up? I mentioned relationships. Let's talk about something I talked about a couple of months ago, ghosting, right? Ghosting. This is where it shows up a lot, right? Because this has become so common today, right? And I'm not just talking about on a romantic level, right? Ghosting has become so common in friendships, in dating, in professional relationships. People just have a tendency to disappear. There is zero conversation. There is no closure. There is no explanation, just gone, right? And the person left behind spends days, weeks, months, sometimes like years asking, what did they do wrong? Was it my fault? Why wasn't I enough? And Brendan, true that. I found that bowing my head and going dead in water is an easy escape to try to encourage peace in that moment. But it also is counterproductive because I'm suppressing my own honest emotions. Yes, you can express your honest emotions without being disrespectful to the other person. And if the person isn't willing to listen at that moment, then you have to be willing to separate yourself from that, kind of have that pause, and you guys come back to it if you can. And that's easier said than done, right? Because that also requires emotional intelligence on the other person. And if they don't have that emotional intelligence, you can like put a pause on it and walk away, and the other person gets offended. Like, don't you walk away from me? And they want to keep beating you up. That's where you have to set those healthy boundaries. Don't reduce yourself to the non-emotional intelligent person and start becoming that, right? So here's the truth many people often need to hear. Sometimes ghosting has absolutely nothing to do with you or your worth. Sometimes it has everything to do with someone else's emotional limitations. Sometimes people disappear because they don't know how to communicate. They disappear because difficult conversations will create that anxiety because they fear confrontation. People disappear because they spent their entire lives avoiding the discomfort. Again, not an excuse, it's an explanation. Because the emotional intelligent people understand something important. Avoidance doesn't eliminate the pain, it transfers it. The conversation someone avoids becomes the confusion someone else is going to carry. The closure someone else refuses to provide, it becomes the question someone else is going to continue asking. Misty, having a friendship end in ghosting, I feel, is just as disappointing as damaging as losing a romantic relationship. That's why, yeah, that does eat at you. And that's what I said, it doesn't matter. Because the reality is that when someone ghosts, and I mentioned that in the episode that I did, when someone ghosts you, it's not even about so much about the person, because you can know the person just for a few days, but the person that ghosts you just triggered something within you. They triggered something within you that they brought up old wounds, right? Maybe you were abandoned. Maybe you were made to feel a certain way. So now it brought all this back. It's not even about the person. Sometimes you honestly don't even care about the person. You don't really you may not even really know them. But when it's a friend, it's way deeper than that, right? And understand the avoidance is never going to solve the problem. And I love when you call someone out on that emotional intelligence and for accountability. And you often hear people say, no, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just protecting my peace. I don't owe anybody anything. I don't. No, there's a difference between protecting your peace and boundaries and accountability. You know, people want real until real shows up and it requires you to be real. And now, when you're being checked at the door, what do you do? So, before I go into understanding versus accountability, Theo, let's pay the bills.
Men of Warrior 22 isn't just apparel, it's a reminder to keep going when life gets heavy. Visit MW22 shop and check out the latest shirts, hats, mugs, and gear built for the mindset, not just the look. Stronger together, no one stands alone. If you need coffee that actually hits different, this is it. Fuel your mind, elevate your day. Go to Ariel Resupply Coffee Company, proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show. Use MW22 for 20% off. Link is in my bio. Empowering Holistic Health is a proud sponsor of the Mental Warrior 22 show and a proud partner of the Mental Warrior 22 Foundation, helping people focus on wellness from the inside out. From health programs and supplements to apparel designed to support your lifestyle, she is building a community around better health and better living. Visit empoweringholistic.com for more. RTS is a proud supporter of the Mental Warrior 22 mission, focused on purpose, leadership, and building stronger people and stronger communities. If you're looking to grow, lead, and elevate your mindset, visit yesrts.com.
I don't know what happened with the bills, but
Warrior 22 isn't just apparel, it's a reminder to keep going when life gets heavy. Visit MW22 shop and check out the latest shirts, hats, mugs, and gear built for the mindset.
has to fight alone. All right. It looks like we are pushing forward here. So let's get into understanding versus accountability. Um, I think this is one of the most important parts in the conversation because I think that we as a society might struggle with this, right? We either become judgmental or we become enabling. We either condemn people or we excuse everything. So emotional intelligence requires something more mature, the ability to hold two truths at the same time. For example, maybe you grew up in a home that was filled with yelling. That explains why they yell, but it doesn't excuse it. Maybe someone experienced abandonment. That explains why they struggle with trust, but it doesn't excuse why they hurt people, right? Doesn't excuse the hurting people. Maybe someone was never taught healthy communication, and that explains their avoidance, but it doesn't excuse it. You see the difference? Understanding that behavior is not permission for the behavior. You know, I often mention PTSD, someone with PTSD, when someone hides behind the diagnosis, like, oh, I can't help it, I have PTSD. No, you can't help it. Don't hide behind the diagnosis. You know, if someone says you're being an asshole, chances are you probably are, right? You're just an asshole who happens to have PTSD. Don't hide behind it. And a lot of people today are comfortable with just having the label, and that's where they stop, right? They stop at that. Oh, well, I can't help it. I have ADHD. Yeah, that explains what's wrong with you, but it doesn't excuse why you continue to do certain things, right? Now that you know what it is, why not work on how to make life a little easier for yourself? Linda, truth. Having hard conversations is key to bring clarity, reconciliation, and create healthy relationships. May have to set healthy boundaries and distance even after these accountable conversations. Yes, yes. Listen, you can love someone to death and still not be with them. You can choose to leave if you have to, right? So again, understanding the behavior is not permission for the behavior. And this matters because a lot of people weaponize their pain, like I just mentioned. The trauma we tend to use as a shield. The childhood is often an experience, like childhood experiences is often an excuse now as a justification. They use the wounds as an excuse. And I want you to understand something, like your pain is real and your pain deserves the compassion, but your actions still require accountability, right? Those two things can coexist. I can wholeheartedly understand your pain, right? But let's not excuse what you just did. There's still some accountability, right? There's still, to every action, there's that reaction. So, Heather, it takes a great deal of self awareness, practice, and internal effort to self reflect and self regulate when you become emotionally dysregulated. In those moments, emotionally can feel overwhelming and immediate, making it difficult to pause, assess what you're feeling, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. The ability to recognize your emotional state, understand this source, and utilize healthy coping strategies is a skill. I I agree. I agree. Deborah, when we know better, we do better. Again, I also agree with that. But some people are just a little more stubborn than others, right? It takes a little more, right? Some of us, you have to constantly repeat these things, and it's exhausting. You know, Emotionally intelligent people, again, will do both, right? Two things can coexist. I can understand your pain, but I can also tell you what you did was not okay. Those two statements are true, right? Don't let anyone manipulate you into thinking different. Like, well, if you're understanding me, then why do you still feel this way? No, because you still did it. You know, that's like watching a murder trial. Oh, this guy did this. He killed someone. Oh, but he suffers from this. Cool. Hey, let's address and understand poor guy or poor girl. They're suffering from this, but are we going to overlook the fact that you still killed someone? There's still there still has to be some level of accountability. And self-awareness is so very uncomfortable. And that's the hard truth about self-awareness. It is so uncomfortable because eventually emotionally intelligence forces us to stop asking what is wrong with everyone else. And you start asking yourself, what role am I playing in this? And that's tough. What role am I playing in this? Am I just enabling you? Am I just allowing this, right? Because it's hard, but also sometimes it's realizing that we're not just a victim. Sometimes we're also contributing. Sometimes we're bringing those old wounds into the relationships. We're expecting people to heal the pain they didn't create. And sometimes we're asking others to carry emotional responsibilities that belong to us. And that's not easy. That's not easy to hear either, because understand that the growth it begins in your moment of discomfort, right? Rarely does it happen when you're comfortable. Growth begins with honesty. Heather, lots of therapy helps. Yeah. And there's all kinds of therapy. Um, so let me ask you all a question. When you're hurt, do you communicate it? Or do you expect people to figure it out? And I think you know what I mean. Um, you can be in a relationship and sometimes you hear, you should know me already. Why do I have to explain it to you? And you'll hear the guy or the other person argue, I'm not a psychic. I don't know what's in your mind. And both can be true, right? So the question is, when you're hurting, do you communicate it? When you're angry, do you express it? Or do you suppress it until you just explode and lash out? When the conflict shows up, do you lean into the conversation or are you avoiding it wholeheartedly? Do you feel emotionally safe around like around other people, and do people feel safe around you, right? Are you okay with people disagreeing with you, or can people disagree with you without fear of your reaction? Do people like, can people tell you the truth without walking on eggshells? Do you listen do you listen to understand, or do you listen to respond? Those questions matter. These are things that we often have to ask ourselves, because it's not measured. Emotional intelligence is not measured by how you act when everything is going your way. Nope. It's measured how you show up when things get difficult. So let's talk about the family trauma, generational patterns. Um, so many of us were raised by people who were doing their best they could, right, with the emotional tools they had, the emotional tools they never received, right? And I want you to think about that for a moment, right? Our parents were carrying wounds they never healed, because a lot of this didn't exist back then. Most of our grandparents were carrying wounds they never talked about. And many people spent an entire generation surviving. They were providing, they were sacrificing, they were working, but they never learned how to process emotions, right? Again, it goes back to be a man, do this. You don't cry, you don't show emotions, right? And a lot of people were raised in that household. A lot of women back in the days were, hey, that's your husband, you stay with him. It doesn't matter whether he is beating you, treating you a certain way, you stick it out, you stay there. That is your role. And that just carried on for generations. This is the time where we're actually talking about these things. But again, I want you to think about the home you grew up in, not the house, the environment. What did your home teach you about your emotions? I want you to think about that. Did your home teach you that emotions were safe, or that your emotions was a weakness? Did it teach you how to communicate, how to avoid? Did people apologize in your house, or did everyone pretend nothing ever happened? Did you discuss the problems, or did you guys just kind of bury that to the side? Were your feelings acknowledged or dismissed? Because every home is going to teach emotional lessons, and everybody, like, nobody intentionally, even when nobody's intentionally teaching you them, there is a lesson in everything, right? Some homes will teach you to talk about it, but other homes will tell you, keep it to yourself, suck it up, you solve your own problems. We avoid the problems. No, don't talk about it, because you don't want people knowing your business, right? Get over it. The challenge is that children don't know that they're learning these lessons, right? You're just absorbing them. And eventually those lessons again become beliefs, and those beliefs are going to become behaviors. And at some point, you become the adult that is either continuing that behavior or chooses to break a cycle. Um, and that is the invisible inheritance that I want to talk about. We think about inheritance often as money, property, assets, material things, but inheritance is far more like emotional inheritance is way more powerful than that, right? Emotional habits is often passed down every day. It is the fear that we pass down, the anger that passes down, the avoidance, the shame, the silence, the like all of that gets passed down. And it's not because we as parents want to harm our children, but because people teach what they know. That's it. You teach what you know. And if all your life you were taught, don't trust people, you're not enough, or certain things, like, that's just the fear. You can break that down into the simplest forms. How many of you don't watch horror movies? So because you don't watch horror movies because you're scared of it, your kids don't watch horror movies because they were never watching it. So now they don't do that, or they're afraid. That's the same with everything else. It's just, that's an example in the simplest form. And some of us grew up in homes where you never apologized, nobody. So now you struggle to apologize. And then there's the opposite of that. So now you over apologize, like constantly saying sorry. So the cycle, it stops with you, because if it doesn't, then this is going to be another emotional wound that you're going to pass over to your kids. Meg, I was taught that they were weakness. If I got emotional, I was told to suck it up, get myself together, and move forward. A lot of us were taught that. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter whether you're a male or female. We all were taught that. Maybe the verbiage was a little different, but the message was the same. And, and again, this may not be everybody. Listen, some of you your parents may have been the ones that broke the cycle, and you grew up with the love and everything. And maybe you had all that love, but then life was lifing and you faced the trauma. And now you're the one that's shut down. And now you're struggling because you can't explain why, right? Like, no, both my parents were great. They loved me. They taught me this. But why can't I see it? That's because the trauma happened to you. And believe it or not, even sitting here today watching the show is showing some emotional intelligence. The fact that you are recognizing that something needs to change, certain patterns. So we're breaking the generational trauma, right? One of the most important moments in a person's life is when you stop blaming and start recognizing. You're not recognizing the fault, you're recognizing the patterns. And there's a difference, because healing isn't about spending your life blaming your parents, right? We all know someone who does that, or unfortunately, you may be that person, like, oh, you don't understand. When I was a kid, listen, I'm not saying it's easy, but the moment you became an adult, there was a certain level of accountability that now falls on you, right? Healing isn't about staying angry forever. Healing isn't about, it isn't just about identifying problems. It is about identifying patterns and choosing something different. Yeah, this may have happened when you were a kid, but I choose not to be this person. Yeah, my dad was an asshole with me. And you know what? I refuse to be that way with my kids. Those things, it starts with you. Like maybe your family avoided the difficult conversations, but you don't have to. Because they did, should be more reason why you should be like, you know what? This is how that made me feel. I want to change that, right? You can create something healthier. Even if emotional neglect was common, you can become emotionally available. And that's where the healing begins. The moment you decide the cycle stops with me, and it's not because you're perfect. None of us are perfect. We're constantly healing. And it's not because you figured everything out, but it's because you're willing to become aware. And us as parents, I want you to think about that for a moment, because children are always watching. Always. I don't care if they're glued to the tablet, kids are listening. Even when you think they aren't, they're taking everything, right? They're watching how you're handling the stress. They're watching how you communicate. If you argue, if you like how you apologize, how you treat other people, the good and the bad, they're absorbing, right? How we treat ourselves. And one of the biggest mistakes that we as parents make is believing that children learn primarily through instruction. They don't. Children learn primarily from observation, and they take all this in, the sponge. You can tell your child to manage their emotions, but if they constantly see the emotional explosion, then what are you learning? You can tell your child to communicate, that communication matters, but if they're watching you avoiding the tough conversations, the communication, then what do you think they're learning? Again, tell your kid accountability matters, but if they never see you hold yourself accountable, children are going to learn what they live, right? No child is born angry. No child is born depressed. No child is born racist or whatever. These are learned behaviors, right? These are learned behaviors, and children learn what we live, not what you preach. And that's why the emotional intelligence is one of the greatest gifts that we can give our kids, that we can pass down. Then there's leadership. Emotional intelligence doesn't just impact families, it's teams, workplace, communities. Some of the biggest leadership failures that I've witnessed had nothing to do with intelligence in itself, but it had everything to do with the emotional intelligence, right? Working with veterans, people come from all walks of life. And you have to, again, from the beginning when we described it, it's understanding what you're feeling, why you're feeling, and then choosing how you're going to respond. If you're in a leadership position and someone is behaving a certain way, it's on you to check your emotions at the door. You don't match that energy because a lot of times that person might be hurting. You don't know what they're going through. So they're showing up to this event, they're showing up to this thing, and they're expressing their emotions how they know how. And again, it's not excusing their behavior, it's explaining and putting it into context. But you in that position should understand and check your emotions because leadership isn't information, leadership is influence, right? People will follow leaders that they trust, and people trust leaders who can make them feel seen, valued, respected. Think about the best leader you've ever had. Take a moment. What made them great? I'm pretty sure it wasn't their resume. It wasn't their credentials. It wasn't their title. It's how they made people feel, right? When you're in the military, some of these people around you, it's how they made you feel. People remember those things. The leader that cared and the person who listened. One of the greatest leadership skills is listening. It's not waiting to talk. It's not waiting to correct the person or to respond. It's listening. It's almost seems like it's a lost skill. People will hear you and they want to respond. They're not truly listening. Most people really just are waiting for that moment, that rebuttal they just want to reply. And people know the difference. People know that. Everyone wants to feel understood. Everyone wants to know that they matter because you do. How I feel shouldn't matter more than how you feel. No. So ask yourself, do people feel safe talking to you? Do they feel respected? Do they feel heard? Or do they feel like they're walking on eggshells? It's things to talk about, things to think about, right? And tonight we've talked about the communication, the relationships, the ghosting, the accountability, families, leadership, and maybe somewhere in this conversation you've seen yourself. Maybe you've recognized strengths. Maybe you recognize some of the struggles. Maybe you recognize things you might still need to work on, and that's okay, right? Because again, awareness isn't a sign that you're failing. Awareness is growth. You can't change what you refuse to acknowledge. And emotional intelligence begins with that awareness. And awareness alone is not going to be enough, right? Because again, understanding the problem isn't solving the problem. Eventually, you have to take action. Eventually, you have to practice something different. You have to become intentional because healing isn't going to happen accidentally and growth doesn't happen accidentally. Transformation doesn't. It requires that muscle memory, that consistency, and even more importantly, honesty. Honesty with the other person and even more with yourself. You don't have to be perfect. Emotional, intelligent people still get angry. They still get hurt. They get frustrated. They make mistakes. Like, you still say you're wrong sometimes, right? The difference is that you recognize it even quicker. The more you do it, the more you will pick up on these cues, the more you will repair it quicker, right? And it doesn't matter in what capacity, what relationship, you will become more aware the more you do it. Is ghosting someone really bad when not everyone deserves your attention? To respond to that, I think that there's also a difference. And again, I mentioned it in that episode. There's a difference between ghosting and setting boundaries. Not everyone does deserve your attention. But I think that if you get into a relationship with someone and you decide it's no longer for you, then even if you feel they don't deserve that conversation, they invested the time just as much as you. Now, I'm not talking about the other circumstances where they're just a complete waste. No. So it costs nothing to let them know. At this point, call them, talk to them, send a text message, put a note on a pigeon's foot, put a message in a bottle. It doesn't matter. But hey, this was great, but it isn't for me. I need to separate myself from this. That's it. The boundaries where not everyone deserves your attention, to me is different. That is, I try to communicate with you. You're not listening. So because you're not listening, I'm going to separate myself. And those people will often say, oh, he or she just ghosted me, without, again, accountability, understanding the role they played in it. So I think that that's important. I think most people listening to conversations like this, when we're talking about growth, you start criticizing yourself, right? Like, I messed up, I'm failing. And we've all done that, every one of us. The goal is never to be perfect. The goal is always progress. The goal is becoming a little more self-aware today than we were yesterday, a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more intentional, right? So, some of the skills is the power in the pause. We mentioned that earlier, right? Because the damage is always going to happen in that reaction. So take a moment to pause. If you're not 100% sure in what's going on, even with your own emotions, like pause, because most people regret their reactions, right? Words are spoken in anger, texts are sent emotionally, decisions made on impulse. So next time you're angry, pause. Right? Next time you're hurt, pause. Right? Also, name your emotion. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? Most people stop at anger, but anger is not the root of the emotion. Right? Anger is often like that bodyguard at the door. There's always something underneath, right? The fear, the embarrassment, the rejection, the disappointment, all those things. And more accurately, when you can identify what you're feeling, you become more effective at how to respond to it, right? Most importantly, I want you to replace assumptions with questions, right? Assumptions will destroy relationships. Questions will build understanding. I want you to understand that, right? Assumptions will destroy relationships. So how many arguments start because someone assumed something? So instead of assuming, ask instead of guessing, clarify instead of creating narratives. Have those conversations. Emotional intelligent people seek understanding before they seek judgment. And listen to understand. Listen, repeat what they just said, summarize it, put it in your own words, right? Many of us are problem solvers, and that's the problem, right? We're problem solvers, so we want to fix, and we want to interrupt. And sometimes the most healing thing you can do is just simply sit with someone and just listen. Don't interrupt. You don't compare. They want to feel seen. They want to be heard. And learn to take ownership. And this was the most hardest one. Pride will fight it. Take ownership in what you're doing and the role that you're playing. Become the person that you needed, right? The love, the guidance. Become the listener, the encourager, right? And maybe no one taught us emotional intelligence. Maybe nobody taught our parents. They're taught their parents, right? But here's the good news. What wasn't taught can still be learned. What was modeled can still be changed. What was inherited does not have to be passed on. You're responsible for what you do with those things. You're responsible for your growth, your healing, awareness, your choices. The moment you stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what can I learn from this? Everything begins to change. So I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Be sure to check out Mental Warrior 22. Next week, we will not be having an episode. I will be on the road, and we will be coming back the following week with something great and amazing. Once again, I want to thank you. Check out nw22.org for more information on great things we have coming on. Understand? Thank you. We are Mental Warrior 22. Remember, everyone sees the warrior, very few understand the war inside. Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here.
How many relationships, friendships, and families have changed because nobody knew what to say? Tonight, we're having an honest conversation about communication